this week's parsha, friends, as you all know, Ari. You see, Ari is here. This week's parsha is one of the, we could say, the central parsha of the Torah, because it has the famous "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." You shall love your fellows, you love yourself. Which Rabbi Akiva said is the great principle of the Torah. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah, and many laws that govern, many laws, many halachas, many mitzvahs in Parshas Kadoshim that govern both man and God and man and man. So first, I want to address "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." Love your fellows, you love yourself. Is that possible? How is it possible? How can you love your fellows as you love your fellow is already a big demand. As you love yourself, it would seem it's a romantic notion, not realistic. The answer, there are many answers to that question. What does the Torah mean? And one of the answers is this statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rashi brings in his commentary on the Torah these words. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said on these words, you shall love your fellows yourself. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is the great principle of the Torah. And the question on Rashi is, as we all know, Rashi only makes a comment if there's a question on the verse at the simple level. If there's no question, he doesn't make a comment and just bring teachings from our sages to enlighten the student. If you want to learn deeper, then you consult the sources. His mandate is one thing and one thing only. You're reading, you understand the simplest meaning, and you have a problem, he'll answer it. If there's no problem at the simple meaning, there may be, and there is, endless teachings in Medrash and so on. He doesn't quote them if the verse is intelligible in its own right. So what compels Rashi to give the comment that Rabbi Akiva said this is the great principle of the Torah? So one of the answers is, if this is to be understood as a direct commandment, then there's no need for the Torah to say, for example, don't kill. There's no need for the Torah to say, don't steal. There's no need for the Torah to say, don't embarrass your fellow. There's no need for the Torah to say, don't speak Lashon Hara. You want these things done to you? No. So don't do it to your fellow. Yet the Torah spells them out. So therefore Rashi says that that's why he brings Rabbi Akiva. It's not a specific instruction. It's an overarching principle or objective. How is it carried out by all these specific commandments? Do you understand? That's one of the questions that compelled Rashi to bring Rabbi Akiva, because this statement renders obsolete or unnecessary so many commandments of the Torah. So he says, no, it's not a commandment. Remove it from the list of commandments. It's an overarching idea. It's a klal gadol, not a specific commandment. How is it fulfilled? All the specifics the Torah gives. Another explanation is, addressing the question we began with, how do you love? How do you love? You felt like you love yourself. So to answer that question too, Rashi brings Rabbi Akiva. We're not talking about how you feel in your heart. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. It's a general principle. So how do you do it? By the specifics. Act lovingly. Act lovingly. That's what the Torah means. How do you act lovingly? Follow these rules. Don't embarrass, don't speak Lashon Hara, don't hurt, give tzedakah, and so on. So two questions are answered by bringing Rabbi Akiva's quote. A, if it's specific commandment, don't have to tell us so many other things. B, how can you command this feeling anyway? How can you command this feeling? The answer is we're not commanding the feeling. It's an overarching principle that is fulfilled through the specifics, which at the end of the day means if you love your fellow Jew, that's wonderful. But don't wait till you love. You act lovingly, whether you love, have that feeling in the heart or not. And that's the commandment. The same thing, by the way, applies to Hashem. Love God, your Lord. I mean, how do you command the love? It's really a related question. You can't command the love. Let's say I want to do everything you tell me. I'm at your service. At your service. Whatever you say, I'm going to do. So if you tell me right now, okay, love him with every desire in the world, either I do or they don't. Now, you could command my allegiance in practice. So I can do. But how can I feel unless I do? On command, it's not possible. So one of the answers to loving God is the same thing. Loving God is act Jewishly, do the mitzvahs, and that's a fulfilled love God your Lord. Apply this in relationships as well. I don't feel lovingly right now towards my spouse or children. All right. You don't always feel love, but you act lovingly. You act as a husband or a father or a friend should act. So this same applies also to Hashem. I don't feel I love God right now. So the answer is, it's about the practicalities. That's what the Torah is addressing. It's the overarching, do all this, that means love. That all adds up to love. It's not a specific commandment. Now, talking about specific commandments, I sent you a text and want to share with you the following beautiful, beautiful message. So you all have the text in front of you. Let's look at it. Where is it? Yeah, here we are. Okay. So the Torah says not to curse the deaf, even though they can't hear you. And then, don't put a stumbling block before the blind. Says Rashi. Will we just read the English? The translation here is not precise. There are the words, this implies. Okay. At any rate, give not a person who is blind in a matter an advice which is improper for him. What's an example of an improper advice? Do not say to him, sell your field and buy from the proceeds of the sale an ass, a donkey. That's bad advice. And he's blind to it. He thinks it's a good idea. Rashi continues, the fact of being that you're endeavoring to circumvent him and take it, the field from him. End of quote. Here are the questions, friends, which are going to lead us to a very, very powerful understanding of what Rashi is saying. Our first question is, why is there a need for Rashi to comment? If the evil is it Mishnah, person's physically blind. Again, Rashi's mandate is to explain the simple meaning of the pasuk. Someone who is blind, don't put a stumbling block. He doesn't see, he's going to fall and hurt himself. What's wrong with understanding the verse like that, the pasuk? That's the pshat. What compels Rashi to say, no, it doesn't mean physically blind, it means, what's what I'm looking for? It means symbolically blind. He's blind to the advice you're giving. He thinks it's good, it's bad. What's wrong with the simple meaning? Pshat. Secondly, if for whatever reason, which I'm soon going to tell you, Rashi is compelled to say it does not mean it literal, and he therefore dips into the medrash, you can see it comes from the Sifra, to understand what it means to be figuratively blind. So friends, the medrash there brings three examples. And here are the three examples. Number one, it says, don't tell someone who's embarking on a journey. In those days, they traveled on foot, or even by caravan, on horseback. Don't tell them to leave very early in the morning while it's still dark. So it sounds like it's good advice. Get a good start on your day, because, says the Medrash, while it's still dark, he's prey to bandits, to show you the dim. One example. Another example, don't tell them to leave in the middle of the day. If you start the journey in the middle of the day, you're open to sunstroke. He thinks it's a good idea, going in broad daylight so people are out. No, it's not a good idea. And the third example is, don't tell a person to sell his field and you're going to buy a donkey. And he should buy a donkey. So the Rebbe asks, our question is, okay, for some reason, Rashi has to explain this pasuk that's not literal, it's figurative. So he goes to the Medrash, which is a non-literal understanding of Torah, goes deeper to find what is the case here. Why does he skip the first two examples? They're much simpler. They're much simpler. And go to the third one about the field and the donkey. And the bigger question is, do we need an example? Friends, in 2 seconds, we can all come up with a million scenarios where we give advice where someone thinks it's a good idea and it's a bad idea. If you have more knowledge, a child can come up with all kinds of scenarios. Rashi has to give an example. He has to go into the Medrash to give an example. Just leave it without an example. Don't give advice that a person thinks is good and it's really bad. So let's summarize the question here. There's no need for any illustrations. If you're giving illustrations, and you're going to the Medrash for that, give the first. Why do you give the third complicated one? And another question. Not only does he give the illustration, but he continues, and you want to get the field. Why? That's like another component to the scenario, which is not material, not relevant here. The point is, you're telling him to sell your field to buy a donkey. That's bad. That you want to get the field, that's another problem, but that's not the issue here. He makes it sound like the only problem here is because you want the field. But the point is the bad advice. So we're mystified. We're mystified why the basic question is, what compels Rashi to make a comment altogether? Why not leave it at the simple meaning? Don't put a stumbling block before the blind. Mind you, another question we could ask elsewhere, other examples are brought in the in the Gemara, is don't give a Nazirite, a Nazir who may not drink wine, so you're giving him alcohol made of tamarim, of dates. It looks like it's dark. It looks like it's wine. You get here, drink this. Now the opposite. You're giving him wine, and he thinks because there's dates that it's date wine and it's permissible. It's a stumbling block before the blind. Here you're giving him wine and he thinks it's date wine and it's permissible. So if Rashi is giving an example, give such an example perhaps. So what's going on? So the answer to all of the above, my dear friends, is this. What compelled Rashi to explain the verse not literally is, it cannot be that the Torah means not to put physically a stumbling block before the blind. Why not? Because we know you're not allowed to do that. In Parshas Mishpatim, we learned earlier all these laws about a person who digs a pit in the public thoroughfare, he doesn't cover it, and someone is walking and doesn't see it and falls in, you got to pay for damages. It's obvious. That we know already. It's already been stated. It's already been stated. So that's already the reason, number one, why it can't be the Torah repeating it again, because that's the same principle. In Parshas Mishpatim, all the laws of a pit in the public thoroughfare, even so much so, there's a pit that is there before, and you dig deeper, you come along and make it even deeper, and someone falls in, you're liable, even though there was a pit before. So you have all these laws. Why? Because the person's walking, he doesn't see it. Not only that, it can't even be, listen carefully, that the Torah means, okay, not physical, but you're giving a piece of advice that is bad for the person. It's the same thing. You can't cause injury to another person, whether he falls and breaks his leg or his vessels, or he's going to lose money. Damage, you can't damage. So give a person bad advice, whereby he is going to be, at the end of the day, damaged. That we learned in Parshas Mishpatim. So can't be the Torah saying this over here, that you can't give advice or do something. It's going to hurt another person. We're talking here financially, physically, financially. So what does the Torah mean? So it can't just mean bad advice, because even that we know. What does it mean bad advice or digging a pit? So here's the explanation. all of us friends made a little mistake. And everybody who read the Rashi, since he wrote it, I should tell you, 800 years ago, for that matter, the Medrash, where it comes from, till the Rebbe, all made the following assumption, which is an error. What do we all assume? We all assumed, what's the bad advice here? You're selling your field for a donkey. That's bad advice. Real estate is a good investment, and a donkey is a stupid thing to buy. The Rebbe says, no, that isn't bad advice necessarily. Obviously, he's going to get for his field as many donkeys as the field is worth. That's number one. It's not one donkey for a field. Obviously, it goes without saying. With the proceeds of the sale. So what's he saying? For some people, depends on the stage in life, etc., it's better to get out of this is real estate, this is farming, the farming business, and go into transportation business. What's a donkey for? For transportation. So first of all, the field only gives you profit once a year. And there's tremendous physical toil that's required to get the profit from the field. A donkey you hire out and it works year round, and there's an income immediately. And there's some people at a point in their lives, when they get older, and there's no children, for example, so stay in the farming business is not a good idea. Sell your farm and buy donkeys, and you'll be in the transportation business. In fact, Yaakov, when he blessed his children, he blessed Yisachar, and he described him as kachamer, like a donkey that carries a load. It's a virtue. So the point here is not that it's bad advice. It could be for him, it's good. So what's the problem? And if it is bad advice, the Torah doesn't have to tell us don't do that, because we know that from before. Here, the whole problem is that you don't mean that advice for him. You want his field. You want the field. But you come along and the guys, you say to him, listen to him. I've been thinking about you, and for you, and you give him this whole explanation, and it could be correct. You should sell the field and go into the transportation. So what's the problem here? So the guy listening to me, he thinks, wow, my friend thought about me, and he's coming, giving me advice, and really what? It's not about me at all, it's about him. Says the Eibishter, you are abusing friendship. Here he thinks that your words are all about him. That's why Rashi adds, it's not just the advice, sell your field and buy a donkey. How does Rashi conclude? And you want to buy the field. That's the whole problem here. Here you are speaking words of love. You are manipulating him. You are mocking him. You are making a mockery of friendship. You're taking words of love that he thinks, wow, you've been thinking about me. That's so beautiful. And what's the truth? You're thinking about yourself and you're manipulating him. It could be, it's not injurious. It could be, it's a good idea for him. But the problem is what he walks away with and what he thinks is happening and what is really happening. And that's a moedic, incredible message here in honesty in relationships. And that's why the pasuk continues. The next words of the pasuk are, and you shall fear God your Lord. Rashi pointed out a few times in this week's parsha, a few times we get a prohibition, and it concludes with fear God. Every prohibition is fear God. Don't do it, fear God. If you look carefully, you see, every time the Torah says fear God, it's the kind of sin that nobody would know, only I know. You didn't hurt the person. You didn't hurt him. It's a good advice could be. No, it's all about intention. Fear, God says, the pasuk says, fear God your Lord, because I will hold you accountable. I know what your intentions are. He doesn't, and none of his friends do either. Good advice, yeah. But you weren't thinking about him. You were thinking about yourself. Don't use friendship and abuse it for your own personal gain. So what should happen in this case, in such a scenario? What should a person do? You should say to him, listen, I want to buy your field. Do your due diligence. It may be a good idea for you to sell. That's it. You do your background research, but I just wanted you to know I'm interested in buying your field. Would you sell it to me? So yes, that's honest. I want the field, and that's the end of the story. But to come along, you know what I mean, thinking about you, my dear friend, and thinking so deeply about the person's financial situation and what's good for him, what's not good for him. And he walks away, wow. And really, it's a mockery. Mighty message in the level of Avos Yisrael. How relevant this is, especially at this time of year, as we all know, that we always read Pashas Kedoshim during the Sfira. And everybody knows that the whole mourning period is because Rabbi Akiva's students did not conduct themselves respectfully to one with the other. I want to tell you something. We just quoted Rabbi Akiva before. Right? There's a question that the Rebbe asks. There's a whole lot of questions, but this is like a Rabbi Akiva is the one that taught, love your fellow as yourself. How could they of all people have transgressed and been disrespectful to each other when the Gemara itself says they are the disciples of Rabbi Akiva, which means they're true Talmidim. And they love their teacher and they're devoted to their master. And Torah calls them an emes Talmud. He taught the Hafal Alecha Kamoicha, and you're disrespectful. So listen to the Rebbe's answer. You know, he said this too. It's on tape, you can see it. It was, Rabbi Eliyahu, the former chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, and a visit to the Rebbe was during this time of year, must have been. And so it's filmed in this conversation. So this is what Rebbe said to him. Because they were students of Rabbi Akiva, against this kind of abuse. Because I love you so much, you got to do it my way. Because it's so beautiful, love you yourself. When they had an argument, and he's convinced that he has the right. This is the answer. How could you not see it? You need to see it the way I do. This is the abuse of the love. The abuse of the love. Because this is a very high level in a way. It's motivated out of love. It's not just like an argument in learning. It's like in the paths of the service of God. You know, there's many paths in the service of God. What to emphasize? Joy, awe, fear, love, in learning itself, the halacha, the medrash. So if a particular Talmud felt that this was the path, this is what Rabbi Akiva meant, then I cannot tolerate, because I love you, that you should do it my way. So it's an abuse of loving your fellow. Why? Because what's true love? The true love is put self aside and give you your space. That's a deeper love. That's a deeper love. It's a high level. It was expected of them. But it's similar to this teaching we're learning over here. On a much higher, sublime level. We're using love and abusing it. Thinking about you, you're not thinking about it. You're thinking about yourself. The student Rabbi Akiva's students is a much higher madrega. He is thinking about that person. But what's the problem? He also has the right. He can have a different perspective, and it's just as legitimate as yours. And if you truly love him, allow him his space. Which is a very profound message. That's the deepest level of love. The deepest level of love is to allow the space, and has many, many expressions, even in parenting as well. You know, you love the kids, so you should do it the right way. You understand better. If you really love, you've got to let the kid do it to some degree, guidance, but on their own. If they make a mistake, they make a mistake. That's how growth happens. True growth is allowing the other one their space, their growth. Even a case where it could be, it's not. You got a better way. Many, critical messages here. What is true love? It all comes down to one thing: honesty and selflessness. That's the core foundation of everything in our relationship with Hashem and our relationship with our fellow. And one more thing to conclude with. It's a whole lot of things today, but it's all tied in. We spoke earlier, love God, your Lord. And the same will apply also to your fellow Jew. Our question was earlier, how do you command love? So our answer earlier was, we're not talking about the feeling, we're talking about the behavior. It's a klal gadol. It's the behavior. That's what counts. But at the end of the day, the question is, especially when it comes to Hashem, it's a commandment to love. When it comes to V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, it's listed as one of the 613. How do you command love? So the famous answer of the Maggid of Mezrich, based on the Rambam, the commandment is, learn about me, get to know me, and you will love me. That's the commandment. Become familiar with me, understand me, and you will come to love me. And that's what Chassidus is getting to know Hashem and his workings and his being, and that engenders, therefore, the love. And the same thing, friend, is about our fellow Jew. If we learn about what a neshama is, we understand what a yid is, cannot but love him. Doesn't mean you love what he does. We can do terrible things. But the yid, him, not negotiable. And the only way to arrive at that, to start to train oneself, to be happy. How do you look at your fellow Jew? To learn, what is a yid? This is Tanya. He says, Tanya, primarily, it's supposed to understand and appreciate what is in the neshama, what is a Jew. And therefore, your taka will love a yid. And that's the same solution or answer, not a solution, the pathway, the only pathway to love God is to get to know him. You can believe in God without knowing him. We all have natural belief. I always give this example. He's passed on, my brother, but I always say this when I talk about this. If I tell you I've got a brother in Australia, he's a wonderful person. His name is Chaim New. Now you believe me, you trust me, he's wonderful. Do you love him? You don't know him. You can't love him. You can believe he exists. You can acknowledge he's a nice person. How are you going to love him? You get to know him. You get to know him personally. You can love him. Same is true of the Eibishter. There is an Eibishter, accept it, believe. It says so. My heart tells me there is. I believe there's a God. Love God. Be in awe of him. If you don't get to know him, how are you supposed to love him? Know him. That's what Siddur is. Siddur revealed. Early generations didn't need it. The final generations got to be explained and addressed intellectually and beautifully, exquisitely, all in order to engender a true love of who God is and Yiddishkeit. And I'm saying the same applies to a Yid, because the neshama is a part of him. The more we learn about Hashem and about the neshama, the more we can actually not just act lovingly, but actually feel lovingly. However, till we get to the feel lovingly, there's no excuse to the act. Here are the rules by which you act lovingly towards God, to put on tefillin, keep Shabbos, keep kosher. Here's how you act lovingly towards your fellow human being. You don't embarrass. You don't, all the things we just talked about before. So it starts with the behavior. We don't wait till I feel. But concurrently, we have to work on not just behaving lovingly, actually feeling lovingly. And that is a result of a deep learning and ever increasing learning and an appreciation. Dear friends, have a wonderful Shabbos.